This is Robbie McKenzie, Youth Ministry 6.3, which comes from Nehemiah 6:3, says, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. I have with me the one and only Sean McDowell. Sean is engaged in a lot of things, but what I'm interested in, at least for now, is his interest in apologetics. Sean actually is involved in his personal speaking and teaching with, I guess it's called Worldview Ministries. And he has a website there, SeanMcDowell.org. But he also, I know, posts on Conversant Life, I believe is what it's called. Conversant Life, that's kind of a blog that he posts on. And so, Sean, I appreciate you being on. Just first question, and I think I know the answer to this, but in case I don't, what got you interested in apologetics?
I would say a couple things. And first off, thanks for having me. I am just wired philosophically and apologetically. I've always been asking questions of why. I want to understand and go deeper. Don't usually accept kind of simplistic answers.
Right.
So I think it's the way I've been wired. Certainly coming up in the family I do with who my father is and the books that he's written, seeing his passion has rubbed off on me. And third, I'd just say, is I look at this generation and I look at where culture's at, I've asked myself the question many times, what can I do to help this generation, to equip Christians and most engaged non-believers? And I keep coming back to one of the missing links within this generation is apologetics. So Pastor Timothy Keller at Redeemer Press, thank you, in Manhattan, he had a recent article on the 5, big things the church must do. And one of the top 3 was a renewal of apologetics.
Oh, wow. That's super. Sort of from a youth minister standpoint, sometimes, when we say, let's talk about apologetics to students, there's some groans and some moans. And so how do you engage students, engage parents in making apologetics so interesting, so engaging, so fresh, to where they actually desire and want to study it more?
I might hear moans and groans at the word apologetics because a lot of people don't know what the word means. Youth and people in the church as a whole.
Sure.
But when I start actually doing apologetics, I find that most of my students come alive because they're human beings. They're made in the image of God, and they're asking tough questions about life, and they want to make sense of the world. So a couple things that work for me. Number one, I do a lot of role play. I'll role play as a Mormon. I'll role play as a Muslim. I'll role play as an atheist. And actually on my website, SeanMcDowell.org, I have a sample of me role-playing. So if someone's like, how do I do this? How does it work? They could just go watch me do it and just copy what I do. I mean, that's the most I would be honored if somebody did that. We're all in this together.
Absolutely.
So that engages kids because I put them on the defensive and I make them defend their claims. You don't have to be a pro to do this. You just have to say, well, why? We'll justify that. How do you answer this? What would you say to this person? And that stirs them up. A second thing I do is I ask a lot of questions. Okay. Even when I'm not role-playing, rather than giving simplistic answers, we need to ask students questions. After all, that's what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. His number one strategy was asking questions and relevant questions. I asked my students recently, I said, do you believe it's okay for, I said, does it benefit couples to live together before they get married? Mm-hmm. And in a Christian school, maybe half my students argued that it did.
Oh, wow.
We had an hour and a half conversation of it. I had thought about it a little bit and ultimately guided them back towards a biblical perspective. Mm-hmm. But I asked them that question. Why do you think God allows suffering and evil? Mm. Why is it that, Jesus, that every religion wants to claim Jesus? What makes him different? And he just probed kids to respond. The third thing I'll do is I use examples in popular culture. Whenever I can find a movie that deals with issues such as life after death, or the role of religion, or the existence of God, or movies that deal with other worldviews like New Age, I'll either show the whole movie, if it's appropriate, or clips of it, because that gets their attention. Then I say, hey, look at what you're doing. There's ideas behind that. It's affecting you and affecting culture, and that gets their attention. So role play, questions, and culture, movies, and music is a great way to hook students.
Awesome. What do you think, since a lot of our apologetics not only should be equipping our youth group, our churches with a knowledge of how to defend their faith, But say an apologetic is we have to defend against certain things when in our discussions with the unchurched. And so say we're having discussions with the unchurched. What do you think they're looking for in us when it comes to apologetics? Now, they wouldn't say that word and they wouldn't think that, but what do you think they're looking for in our discussions about Christianity?
I don't think most people are walking around with apologetic questions or even questions about God at the forefront of their mind.
Right.
In their typical lives, most people are trying to find relationships. They're trying to have a job. They want to do something fun on the weekend. They want to save for retirement. I mean, they're just trying to live and survive in life. But behind that, when some kind of crisis comes or when somebody relationally engages them, people are interested in those questions. And I think if you go down a notch, people are asking them. I mean, look on the blogosphere. People are alive with these type of questions and they're debating them. And they want to have conversations about these issues. So I think probably the two most pressing questions today that people have are the problem of evil and the exclusivity of Jesus being the only way to get to God.
Sure.
And I'd say hell is probably pretty big now as well.
I would say so with the recent books that have been released. What are some do's and don'ts when talking with someone about Christianity?
Great question. I recently wrote an article in the Christian Research Journal, and I went to hang out with skeptics for a whole night, and I sat in the hot seat for 2 hours. And it was really, really fun, actually.
I bet it was.
And I learned a lot because I went there not with the attitude to save them all, although that would have been wonderful, and God could have done that. Not with the attitude to give them truth, with the attitude that I wanted to learn a lot. What do they really think about Christianity? What do they really think about Christians? I want to know what their real objections are. And I want to just be a good Christian ambassador who is thoughtful, who is loving, hopefully who is a little bit funny at times, and just the type of person that would draw them ultimately at least one step closer to Christ. So what are they looking for? They're looking for people, I think, that genuinely care, that aren't just trying to win them, chalk it up, to Christ and move on. Right. People that will care about them whether or not they embrace Christianity. I think they're looking for people who will actually listen. And they're looking for people who are really, truly living it out.
Absolutely.
That they see it in their life, that they believe it, and it's meaningful to them, and they apply it. And it's not just something they do on Sunday, but it really deeply is the way that they live.
Awesome. Sean, you talked about the problem of evil, suffering and so forth, and you talked about the exclusivity of Christ. What are some other issues that we're going to have to address, that we're going to have a healthy apologetic about when it comes to Christianity?
I think most apologetic issues today are primarily moral issues. So it's important to show intelligent design. I've written a book on it, that God exists. But most young people believe in some kind of God. They just don't have the confidence that he's there. It's important to do other big apologetic questions like that. But I think moral issues like homosexuality, moral issues like hell, moral issues, again, like Jesus being the only way is saying, well, this isn't fair, and this isn't moral, and this isn't right.
Right.
They're primarily moral objections, and a lot that I hear from the Old Testament just rattled by the new atheists about genocide and slavery and, the bad that religion has allegedly done.
Sure.
That's a big one that I hear people talking about, especially since 9/11, and we see the, Muslim terrorism that takes place. And even this guy in, Norway who said he's a Christian. I mean, you look at his 1,500-page document, and it's anything but Christian.
Right.
In fact, it's full of Darwinian evolution, some of the ideas guiding it. But people think and have been fed in our culture that religion is bad and it's dangerous. And we need to make a case again that Christianity has been good for the world and is good for the world and is good for their individual lives.
Thank you. Awesome, Sean. A couple more questions.
Sure.
And one of them might be really tough, this next one, just to narrow it down. In all your discussions, in all your journeys, in all your places that you've been and people you've seen, what has been probably the best success story when it comes to winning someone over to Christianity? And I know that's so hard, but if you could just throw out an example of probably the best success story that you've come across.
Again, it's going to depend on how we define success.
Sure.
If we assume that success is just somebody coming to Christ,
No.
then that might be different than saying success is clearly presenting the gospel
Yeah.
in a loving and genuine fashion and having a long-term view of somebody's life.
Sure.
So I don't base the success of me as an apologist or an evangelist, whether people respond or not.
Mm-hmm.
By that definition, Jesus would have been a failure, probably more than
Absolutely.
success.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one story that comes to mind. I had a friend who called me up on the phone, brilliant, perfect scores in math and SATs, double major at leading college in the country, and calls me on the phone. He says, "You teach your students to defend the faith, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, where do you start?" And I said, "Why are you asking me now?" Because I had talked with him for probably a decade about Jesus, intelligent design, very appropriately within our relationship and not, hounding him with it. And it was just, it was like water in the back of a duck, very little interest in it.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden he's asking me, and I said, "Well, why are you interested?" And his brother at 15 had gotten a brain tumor. And he said, "It shook me up to my own mortality."
Oh, wow.
So we met at a coffee shop shortly after that, talked for 2 hours. He sat down, he goes, "I need to know, is there any evidence for the existence of God? Scientific evidence." So I laid out some of the typical arguments. He talked about Jesus, exclusivity of Jesus, talked about what salvation is, and I laid it out there for him. And at the end, he looked at me and he said, "I think I believe that Jesus is God."
Wow.
Now, he has not made a decision to follow Christ yet, and it boiled down to two things. He doesn't like Christian he thinks if you become a Christian, you just have to watch Fox News. That's his perception of Christian politics.
Right.
And second, what his friends will think about him.
Sure.
So I have no control over his will and decisions for believing or not. God is going to have to break his heart, and he's going to have to decide the truth is more important than convenience. But as far as loving somebody, answering their objections, clearly presenting the nature of the gospel, I mean, I don't know what more I can do. And we're still in conversation. I look at with long term, and I feel like he's going to turn around. He's ultimately going to come to Christ.
Absolutely.
So that's a success. I'll tell you another one. I had a debate a year and a half ago on a public university campus. If someone likes to watch debates, it's on my website, SeanMcDowell.org. It's on God and morality. And afterwards, an atheist who was there, who grew up in a Christian home, Southern Baptist, said he left his faith, emailed me, and the subject title said, "Kindred Spirit." And he went in there and he said, I don't know of any other Christians who are willing to take criticism, who are open-minded and thoughtful like you are. He's a philosophy student, and he asked me to mentor him.
Wow.
So I mentor this atheist student. We get together every, month or 6 weeks, and we debate and dialogue issues and talk about life. And I don't know that he's one step closer coming to Christ,
Right.
but he knows that he's loved. He's thinking about Christianity in a way he had never thought about it before. I'm learning a lot and understanding atheism and his worldview differently. And I consider that to be a success. And I hope and I really pray that in the long term God will use me in his life. But all apologetics is clearing away objections that people have. They can see Christ for who he is and decide if they're going to follow him or not. That's all we can do.
That's awesome. Last question. As a youth minister, we're always looking for resources. We're always looking for things to engage our students, engage our parents, engage ourselves in the idea of apologetics. And so something recent that I've come across and that we talked about earlier is your God Quest curriculum. And so talk about that. Talk about what we can do to engage in that, and what we can do and how it will help our youth ministries or even our own personal journey with God.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Robbie. I'm in the same boat. I'm always looking for good resources.
Right.
This series that you called the God Quest is probably the culmination of how I've been planning and thinking about this for about 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
I've had the dream of creating a first class in terms of technology, in terms of the quality, the way it's done, curriculum that just deals with the basic apologetic issues that students and the church as a whole deal with today.
Right.
So I wanted to get away from some of the type of resources that kind of embarrass us as Christians and go, oh, stop. And make it just interesting, engaging, relevant to students. So I partnered with Outreach, which is a marketing company. They have Outreach Magazine. They did all the, like the Passion and Soul Surfer, stuff like that. And it's a 6-part series, and it's just the six big questions. How do you go on a spiritual journey? Evidence for creation, intelligent design, the Bible, historical Jesus. Why is there evil? And how can you say Jesus is the only way?
Right.
And the videos are between like 12 and 16 minutes. I teach in there, but we bring in interviews of people like Dave Dravecki, a major baseball player who talks about going through suffering and pain. Lee Strobel's in there. My father, Josh McDowell's in there. We have some really good just graphics that come up. So it's a fast-moving quality teaching. So it's kind of like apologetics for dummies. Not that it's simplistic,
right?
But for the youth pastor who goes, boy, I'm not trained in this. I don't know where to start, but I see that it's important to at least engage my students and start to equip them on the basic questions of life. So we jumping here real fast. I actually wrote a nonfiction book, and there's a fiction book, which is a novel. And then there's study guides, one for adults, and then there's a student study guide. And our hope is that in a church, adults and students would go through the series at the same time, so they're kind of having a common conversation. Because in our churches, sadly, we often split apart youth from adults, and this would kind of have them on the same page. Then there's the DVD series and a few other resources people can get. But honestly, it came out, and I think the student pack's like $20 or something.
Wow.
I mean, it blew me away, because usually they're about 4 times that much. So we're making it as affordable. It's top quality, easy to use, plug and play, engage your students, and also the kind of thing you can have your students invite their non-Christian friends to. And they can hear how Christians think about these big issues, and open a conversation about God. So the place to get it is, the website is just GodQuestOutreach.com, GodQuestOutreach.com, and then there's a Facebook page just / The GodQuest. Don't put GodQuest, but The GodQuest on Facebook. And all the stuff is there, and I blog on it, etc. So that's probably the one I'm most excited about.
Awesome. Sean, hang on a little bit. Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. This is Youth Ministry 6.3 with Sean McDowell. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. You bet.